I was asked to say a little bit about COVID-19, that pandemic, the virus that's going around this country and this world. One of the things I always remember is our Anishinaabe also knew that virus or any of these illnesses traveled. Whenever our old men would speak for their tobacco at our dances, they would always offer that tobacco for that which we see that travels around, meaning something, a sickness or illness that travels. So they would always offer that tobacco, that virus or that illness or that sickness would not come near any of the Anishinaabe communities. And also, what they did, our old people did, when it came to illness or sickness or traveling viruses, what they would do, everybody in the household would collect an item of clothing that would be tied together in a bundle. And each one of these items of clothing, they would put a piece of plug tobacco tied onto that item of clothing. And they would go out there and hang it in the woods. And they always said that when that traveling virus, that traveling illness came by and saw those items of clothing and accepted that tobacco that was put on each item of clothing, they would not approach the homes of those that brought their clothing out there, and they would escape that sickness. And there was also one of the old ladies that told me that in some communities they also burned those items of clothing that they hung out there. And also some of them, they got to the point where they would create an effigy, or kind of like a doll, of a person out there hanging from that clothing that was put there. And they would set fire to that effigy also. And that would protect our people. Also, what the other thing they talked about that points out they knew that this sickness traveled. They were always afraid to go outside whenever it was foggy out. There was like kind of smoky out there. There was moisture in the air. And they would talk about that fog, they would warn others not to walk through that fog because it had those droplets of water within that fog. Inside of those droplets were the viruses or sickness or illness, and you could catch it that way. So here again points out that our Anishinaabe knew that about our illness. Also, one of the other things I talked about, the old man that raised me was born in 1892. And of course he was around when that smallpox epidemic went through. I believe that was in the year of 1918. And anyway, when we lived out in Ojibwe, they had built a dance hall next to our home. And sometimes what would happen is white people, more than likely church people, would bring their used clothing over to the hall So our Indian people live in the community there, they could go through those items of clothing and use whatever was there. And every time that happened, that old man used to get really upset. He would always say, they're bringing that sickness, that illness to us again. And he must remembered and recalled when they passed out the blankets to us as a people, and they had the sickness, that smallpox in there, with the idea of wiping us out as Indian people. So he could remember that. Then the other part I talked about is my theory on why the pandemic, this disease has come to this country. A lot of times I take a look at things that are happening, and I always think there's a reason for this and that happening. And I was thinking about a couple of things when I was looking at this. One of the things is when we do funerals, we discourage people from bringing cut flowers. Way back in Mille, we had a funeral. The first time I guess cut flowers were brought to this funeral, one of the old ladies got really upset. Why did they go and kill these flowers for this? And which shows that they believed these were just like living things. They had a life of their own. And for them to kill them and bring them to a funeral wasn't cool. And it wasn't that long ago, too long ago. Somebody showed me an article on a computer about what Chimukuman had done. They use what is called ultrasound. By using the ultrasound, they can hear things that our human ears cannot hear. When they put that ultrasound close to some cut flowers, they could hear those little flowers screaming in pain. So, which goes to show that those are like living beings. The same thing, when people are grieving, they've lost a close relative. One of the teachings they are told is go out in the woods and release all of those emotions. Let them out, and those when they do go out there will hear you and take pity on you. Also, there was a tornado, I think in the last 2 years or so, in the Round Lake, Wisconsin community. And through that tornado and those winds, there were a lot of trees that were knocked down because of those strong winds. And there were at least a couple people that told me that live in the Round Lake community, when they got up the next morning after the storm and they saw all of those trees that were blown over because of the storm, as they went outside, they could hear those trees crying out there. Here again, that points out that everything that is out there is alive and well. And that is the reason that whenever we go to pick anything out there, we put our tobacco for those living things. also for the lakes and the rivers. When we go out there, we put our tobacco because there is a money due in that body of water, and we need to show our respect for that money due there. I was always taught when I go out to swim, be sure I put my tobacco first and act respectfully out there. And always remember there's a money due living out there. So if you take a look at what has happened to our world, all the pollution, especially our lakes and our rivers, how a lot of our money, those money due out there must be really upset with all of that pollution. They're kind of getting smothered by all of that pollution. So I really think and a lot of that what is living out there, including the animals, I must be crying out in pain for all of it. The stuff they have been enduring as a result of people polluting this world. And the other money dude must have heard them crying out in pain. And I really think that's why this illness came along, this virus, this disease. If you look what happened after the virus hit here, a lot of our people were discouraged from traveling, to stay home. They were on lockdown. And as a result of being on lockdown and not going out there in the wild, a lot of our tourists, our fishermen, some of them didn't listen. As a result, a lot of our lakes and our rivers cleared up. And there were some sections of the world where there are mountains. And a lot of the little towns by those mountains could never see the top of those mountains, the whole mountain, because of all the smog, all the pollution that hung in the air around those mountains. And with the pandemic, with COVID-19 coming along, they began to see a lot of this pollution clearing up because people were not out and about traveling. So you can imagine a lot of this that is living out here is being hit by all of this pollution coming down from the atmosphere. And what it's doing to them is practically smothering them. And it's no wonder that they begin to cry out in pain. In pain for what they were enduring, and all these other Manidug brought this illness along. So people were kept away from the wild, from the rivers and lakes, and weren't able to pollute anymore. And if you take a look at this illness too, what it does to people, it smothers them. Once that virus gets into them, it smothers them, much like what happened to these Manidug, these living things out here. It's kind of like what goes around comes around. And that's my theory and idea on why the virus has attacked our country. Even though we have the vaccine, people are getting vaccinated, it's going to take some time for that to kick in. So my advice was for everybody to continue wearing your mask. The Anishinaabe word for that is which gibitune gibijane pizon. that which covers the nose, covers the mouth and the nose. Make sure when you wear that mask, you cover both. So that virus is in the air, much like what our Anishinaabe people believed. And also to continue washing your hands. Stand there and wash your hands thoroughly. Usually, I'll stand there and go from, cover all the letters from A to Z until I'm done washing my hands. Thoroughly soaping them. Also, to do the social distancing, not to go and approach people. Keep your distance so that the virus is not transmitted. Even though it's uncomfortable wearing the mask or keeping yourself distance from people that you love, you got to remember that in the long run, by doing that, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're also protecting those people in your lives, your relatives, and especially their elders. Some people can run around without not showing any signs of having COVID-19, but it's there, and they can transmit that virus to someone. So please be careful. And remember, by taking these precautions, especially by wearing these masks, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're also protecting others, your relatives, and those that are close to you that wouldn't want to transmit that disease to others. Also, when it comes to ceremonies, it's kind of controversial with some people. I really think that we ought not to risk having these gatherings. I know I personally would be really hurt. I would be disappointed if I called a ceremony together and somebody caught the virus as a result of our gathering. That's not the chance that I'm going to take with our people. Miigwech, I think I pretty much translated everything. Miigwech.